Hey guys, what's up? I'm back again with another video. This time I want to just talk about basic layering for chords. I do a couple different things when I'm working with chords. There's many different ways to achieve this. So, like I've said in my previous videos, by no means is this the only way to do it. So, if you guys have found a way that you really like how your chords or your leads are sitting in your mix, then continue what you're doing and don't worry about it. This is just more for someone that's been struggling or kind of wants to see another way to do it if this is different from how they're doing it. So, but yeah, try it out and see if it works for you. And I'm just going to go through basically the layering I do, a little bit of the sound design. I'm going to use simple, the best part about my chords and what I do with the layering is pretty simple, but the way you mix them is kind of how you get that warmth sound in the mids with the chords. So that's kind of the main, the hardest part, I guess you could say, is of course the mixes. Everybody knows as a producer, mix downs are very hard to achieve. So take your time when you're doing that, and it's always trial and error. That's kind of the best way you'll figure it out. But let's dig right in. I just put together a couple just standard drums and effects and rides just to speed up this video for us so you can hear those real quick. And then I always start out with a piano. I have true pianos loaded up. I always start out with a piano preset when I'm just playing out on the keyboard to figure out my MIDI, my chord progression, everything. I always start with a keyboard. So, you guys can start with a synth, whatever works for you. There's no right or wrong with that. That's just my personal taste. I like starting out with a grand piano style sound. So I came up with these basic chords for us to work with today. So those are the basic chords that are going to kind of drive the mid, the chord progression of the whole song. And usually what I do from the piano is then I go into like a standard saw sound, kind of like that Cedric Gervais sound chords. I always start with that saw patch with a little bit of noise to it. So I'm going to load that up in silence so you guys can see this is a very basic. All I've done is load up the saw wave here. And you don't need any voices on it because you want the saw to be very tight. I don't want it to be wide. And I don't put anything else on here for oscillators. I only have the noise that comes up. I used to do this a lot on the Virus hardware. So I use the noise on silence too if I'm not using the Virus. So you want to bring up a little bit. You can see here just a little bit of volume I've got. Not much on the noise because you don't want to overload the 10K. The higher range of the spectrum. That's not the idea. It's really to just give it grit and clarity when that saw is coming through. So you can hear that now. So yeah, usually you can see I have the effectrix on there, just ducking the last note of the progression to give that pitch bend. Usually I'll do that in the piano roll, but to speed things up, I put that on. And then I have a low pass filter just in case I want to control any filtering outside of silence filter. So like I said, yeah, check out these oscillators. So simple, but I use it in almost every chord progression I build. It's like the bass, the biggest part of the chord. This saw kind of drives it. So try it out. You can see I didn't do any processing in here because I usually try not to for the chord. I try to do any of the processing here in the channel strip. But I'm also going to add a pitch, just a little bit of LFO to it, and you can see how that sounds now. And I always set that to a 16 rate. You can see right up here when it changes, it's on the 16th. Just bring up the gain a little bit, mess with the gain to make that LFO change. I usually automate this, one flat, one open with the LFO going, just to change up the chords so they have a little bit more movement and they're not so boring. So that's something too to check out. It's a big part of making chords kind of have more personality and character to them. So that's the first layer I always put in, and LFO to give the side chaining. Now the best way I always make this chord stick out is using mid-side EQing. I always duck out the low, take all of this out with the stereo image, suck that in from left to right. So you can hear that subtle difference of that, 10 seconds of EQing. So just mess with it, trial and error, like I've said before. Find that sweet spot in the EQ that really makes the chords come to life. But yeah, please use Pro Q too if you guys aren't. I can't recommend anything else. It's an incredible EQ. So that's the first main sound of the chords with the piano. Now I would always duplicate this patch down, this main patch, solo it out, take this stuff off, so you're kind of starting from zero. Go back in here. Now I'd basically mess with my settings. I've already had my general settings. I don't need any more noise. You can take that out. Now I'd build something with more of a square or something more that has more body to it. So you can see how that's like adding a little more character to this first patch we did. I'll solo it back and forth without it so you can hear the difference. See how it gives it that little bit of grit. It's also a taste, what you're going for in your chords. But for me personally, I want that little bit of grit and distortion in the chords to drive it more. It gives more energy and more punch to the whole mid of the song. So that's kind of what I'm personally going for in my song. So that's why I generally do that style layering. Try to get a little bit of a distorted patch in there. Try to add some saturation to make it stick out a little more. Something like this you can put on. There's so many patches in here. Go through them if you guys have this. I always put on like a warm tube sounding effect. So you can see how it's giving even a little more crunch in this area, giving it a warm tube saturation effect. That's a great tool. Also, Fab Filter Saturn, I use that a lot. So these are two main chords, but basically the main part of separating these two is you got to consider the EQ, what's, where they're sitting in the spectrum, because you don't want them to phase out a little bit. Phasing as in this patch will have too much saw, and this patch is all saw. Therefore, the saws are gonna just mesh too much and create a phase, because they're obviously making the same oscillator sound, which is what you don't want. That's when you get sounds clashing and stuff like that. It's almost like when you have two of the same snares hitting that are exactly the same snare, it's gonna sound like a phase, kind of a messy sound. So you don't want that. Just make sure the sound oscillators are totally different to kind of give a different character, because if they're the exact same wave, like I said, you're going to get two saws the exact same sounding and you'll get a phase effect. So usually what I'll do now with these two specific chords is I'll bus them over to another channel. So you guys do however you need to do this in your DAW. This is just how I do it in Logic. I bus them over to number 1. So that opens over this channel now, and now both my chords are right here. Actually, I'll go back. I don't want to use that since everybody doesn't have UAD. I'll use something like Waves. I think everybody has a lot of the Waves plugins. Open up the 3A. This is a compressor. I've gone over this before in my other sessions. Basically, all I'm going to do is reduce the signal coming through from these chords, so we're not redlining too much and we're getting more of a glued effect. So that's feeling a little more glued. We're not really going too far with making the sound too hot and too distorted. And then if you want to add a little more character to the chords, something like Maserati you can put on to give a little more grit and character to the bass line. The GRP I like to put on, it gives more character. This is a great plugin for guitars. You can use it on vocals, group buses, a bunch of stuff. Any of the plugins that Maserati has is incredible stuff. You can see right away the initial preset. I didn't even click on anything. It gives a different character right away to the layers, simply from the signal just passing through this plugin. Basically what I'll do is go through the low, mids, and highs and understand what I'm lacking in the individual channels, and I'll apply a little bit more warmth in these knobs here in the parameters to continue to make the chords even warmer. So you guys can hear that everything we're doing here within the last 5 minutes or so has been making the chord sound better and better, brighter, thicker, more glued. All of this is all going to pay off in your entire mix when you're doing everything later on with your top leads, your bass line, etc. All that's going to pay off because you're really taking your time on adding these subtle character changes to the chords. So I'm just going to apply another one. Usually I do about 3 chords Now I'd usually do one with just a little bit of high-end character. So I duplicated it down, but I'm going to take out everything all the way up to 2K. I do a low cut 96. That cuts everything in here right to 2K. I don't need anything else in here because I have these two chords that we just did before taking up all of that. And I'm going to take this out of the bus. I want to have this as its own channel right now so I can hear it completely. The signal is completely how it's supposed to before we process it. Okay, so I'm going to go back down to one voice when we had the initial saw. And I'm going to take off the pitch LFO stuff we did. We don't need that. I want like a straight saw that's going to give a little bit of character to the 10K, 7K range. Okay, so, I could go all day on this. Again, trial and error. I'm just going to pick that for now to give a little bit more character to the high end. Yeah, it's just going to accent a little bit. You want to mix this sound really low because you don't want it to pierce through, because this is going to be in a really bright spectrum area where you can start hurting your ears a little bit. So make sure you mix this volume a little bit lower and just have it as an accent piece to these two chords. And then the last thing I usually do on this high-end one is I put a tremolo on, usually on a 16 rate, to give it a little more character, a little more bounce or running effect, you could say. I'm sure everybody's DAW has this. This is just Logic's internal tremolo. I set it to a 16th rate, and this is going to give that Alesso kind of rhythmic feel to the chords you can hear. So you can hear the big difference, and why I do this on the lighter layer, the one that has just top end, is because if you can do this on your mid chord layers too, but then you're missing that drive. The chords that don't have this on, these two patches here, have drive because they're straight chords. They don't have, they're just being ducked with the LFO. But if I put the tremolo on these, I'm going to start to lose that power and warmth in these chords. Now, it does sound great. Use that maybe on a breakdown part or something. You'll hear that in a lot of Alesso songs. It works great, but as for me in the main chorus drop part, I like those chords to be not having too much of that tremolo effect. You want them to have a lot more punch and drive. So that's why I do it on just the top layer effect to make it feel like these chords have a little bit more hop to them or energy. So it's starting to come to life a little bit. Generally what I would do from here, I got 3 layers. They're starting to feel good. I'd mess with maybe the MIDI later, whatever. Then I would go into the bass line. Again, I would repeat the same process I did. I would start with a saw bass patch, bring down the octaves a few to get the low end part of what I'm going for, which I'll do real quick for you right now just to show you. Take out all these notes. You only need the bass notes here. So I'll solo those out. I'm going to get rid of all this stuff that I have. Keep the LFO. Let's do this again. I keep the LFO, going to silent, and I'm going to take this out of the bus too. I want this a direct output. I don't need it going through the bus right now. So I'd basically use the same patch I was using before, but I'll drop these octaves down to meet the lower notes. So yeah, simple as that. Like I've said before, simple saw stuff is so great to work off of. Use it as a good starting point for you guys. I know everybody gets thousands of presets, and that's great to scan through, but also try to go back once in a while and understand what you're doing as far as the sound design process, because if you understand what these oscillators are doing, it's going to help you achieve a certain sound that you're going for. If you're just scanning through presets for hours, sometimes you'll never find what you want because you really don't know truly what you're looking for in the oscillators. You're just looking for a sound. So try to dial back once in a while and find out what these oscillators are doing for you, so you can understand how to sound design certain patches yourself from scratch. So I'm starting not to like the phase, so I'll take that out. And then after I found, that's kind of sitting well in the mix, I would then bust that over, do the same idea I did with these patches, kind of make it mesh a little more. Start mixing it down a little more with the volumes. It's sounding pretty good for the quick time we've worked on it. But kind of repeat the processes we've done here, bust stuff out, make it sound good, mix it in, just kind of bust it with compressors and stuff to glue this bass line in. But then I would go in and do some pitch bending effects here with the notes to make them glide and make them have more character. But overall, that's really it for chord layering. There's a lot more things I can do. Then I would jump into the leads, the top leads, to play a melody over it. I also would go into just even trying shifting keys completely to try a different sound, see if I was working on the wrong key or something. So yeah, I highly recommend doing that. Just sit here with your song on play and keep going up and down the scale to find a different key that might work best for you. Because if you're working on F the whole time and you're trying to understand why you're missing some energy or something, maybe bump it up to G and see if that works a little better. But yeah, that's mainly it for chord progressions. What I do for layering. Hope that helped, and we're going to do probably lead layering next. I'm going to get to that right away, but I wanted to go over the basics for what I do for the chord layering and a little bit of bass layering. But hopefully you guys enjoyed, and feel free to ask me any questions, and I'll see you guys next time.